New topic. Let's just move on to the new topic, which is, as you were doing this, as you've been doing this research, what globe resources have you checked to validate all of this stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question. When you start investigating, so you have to kind of go back in and go, okay, so where is all this, how do I know this information is correct, and what do I use, and all that? What's my determination? So I think if you go, can you show my resources used page, Matt?
You bet. Let's see here. Let me share that up again.
Okay. So when you said resources, I have to look at kind of background information. A lot of that, some of that comes from traditional education and teachings, what you're brought up on, and gives you sun miles. So, okay, yeah. Did I pay much attention to it? Not really. But again, there's a lot of it comes through education and teachings. The internet, great resource. Now, how reliable are some of those sources? You got NASA.gov, Wikipedia, mapping. The main mapping resources that I used military maps, especially for resolute time. I wanted to look at grid north versus magnetic north, that exact location. Military science has a mapping. It's called ARCHES, and it's geospatial. It's almost like Google, kind of like Google Earth. It's almost exactly. The military has a little separate one. What's the big difference between them? It may be a little bit more accurate, may not be. But again, it's the same thing. You can get your latitude, longitude. You can get all your GPS locations. So when I looked at that, I'm looking at, okay, I see, objects of the globe, all right.
By the way, not to interrupt you, the chat just suddenly showed up.
Okay. Great.
I didn't touch a thing.
Well, it needed a break.
I guess so. This is the break fixed it. Okay, so back to you. I'm sorry I interrupted. So Rob Parks asks, which branch did you serve in?
I was in the
Army, right?
Army, yeah. Army Field Artillery. Field
Artillery, which really is super interesting. If we have time at the end, after we get through our topics, we're going to come back to that, because artillery and round earth, I mean, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, you were saying
so
about Google Earth and the Army's version of that.
Yeah, which is what they call ARCHES. It's one of the mapping. It'll show a globe. It'll show the same thing kind of as Google Earth. So I looked at those. We're looking at, again, geometric shapes. NASA.gov. I looked at, and this is one of the things I looked at. What photos of Earth do we have? What are the pictures, the place you're telling me I live on? NASA.gov. I think the last image, and I may be incorrect, the last image was like the 2012 blue marble shot. I don't know. Do you know anything that's later than that?
Absolutely. In fact, let me ask you a question. Did you hear about the volcano?
Well, volcano. No.
Volcano erupted. Y'all watch the news. Volcano erupted. And the most amazing thing is to watch the satellite videos of the volcano eruption. Yeah, we have a shot of the Earth, multiple actually, every few minutes from space.
Okay, so it's a backdrop image, or what? How far are we talking about? What's the distance? I mean, can you
million miles?
You can see it.
Well, no. Okay, we have multiple. I think Discover is back online. Y'all in the chat can correct me if Discover went down again, which is 1 million miles from the Earth, so it's just a one shot. We also have multiple geostationary satellites that are getting one shots of the Earth.
Okay, so when I look at that, because I look at geometric shapes, is this, how close to this is a perfect circle or oblate spheroid, or right, what is it, so you want to kind of look at that. And, if we look at a top-down image, And again, when you look at arches or when you look at Google Earth, how accurate are these, as to what would look pretty circular as if I look down, top down, straight down on it. Now, when we look at our latitude and longitude, and again, when I talked to some people, I said, well, that also, you're looking at curvature as far as what you look at your latitude and longitude, okay? Because you're looking at your distances. So that's another reference point you can use. So one of the heliocentrists didn't know that. I said, well, yeah, you can use that if it's accurate, if it's correct. So that's one thing. Now, when I had to look back at, and I listed my military references. There's also video links on there. You can find these on my website, and this goes into the video links show actual how you do a Hasty Astro, how you do grid magnetic. So if people don't know about that, they can go to my website and click on those links, and they can kind of watch it. Now it's very technical, but again, it'll show you that Mr. Corey is kind of talking. He's not just giving you a line. In other words, this is an actual process. Some people may question that. You can look at video links.
Well, let me ask you. Oh yeah, we'll look at the video links. While I do, let me ask you. I think you mentioned before. It seems like I'm the first Glober who's sent you a video with diagrams specifically to reach out to you about this. I don't want to claim I'm the first one who's done that. I know that Ruhif, for example, I'm a subscriber of Ruhif, plug for Ruhif. Mm-hmm. He showed what I'm going to show here in a few minutes. But I don't suppose you watched that stuff. And I don't think he sent it to you. He said he was emailing with you to get the content and that you shared the data with him. Mm-hmm. But I don't think he really reached out in the same way that I did about this.
No. And again, that's why I asked, because I asked people, say, well, show me a diagram or something that you're talking about, so I can kind of get an understanding, kind of get your point or what you're seeing and what you want. And you've made some good points about, you're talking different language, Corey. So that is an issue. And flat earthers tell me the same thing as, oh, man, you're talking stuff I don't know. And again, it's because the community that I work in, so I'm used to talking that language, that lingo. But you'll see even within like the military science field, guys in the military, like, and I'll give you an example, like for an artillery battalion, how many celestial surveyors or how many, people that actually know celestial survey within an artillery battalion? You have roughly 3 firing batteries. So you probably have anywhere from 4 to 8 people that can do that. Now, celestial survey, probably a lot less. Probably about half of them know how to do star shots and sun shots. I didn't get introduced to it until I got into the airborne community. I know the Marine Corps does it. So some of your, I'll call them high-speed units, do the celestial survey, celestial survey activity. So it's very limited field, because when I ask people, well, where are all your celestial surveys? Most of them are in the military, believe it or not. So those are people that know how to use
the ones in astronomy, right?
The sun and stars, for exact positioning. The military science references, when I had to go back and I started looking at all of this, I listed my military references. In other words, I had to go back and look at some manuals. Now, some of the things that really stood out to me when we talk about these references, I find it. If you go to, let's see, go to number 9, Matt, if you would. Number 9.
Okay, that's going to be up.
Yeah.
Oops. I'm on the wrong. Hold on. Give me a moment while I fumble with my. Rob Parks. Let me put this up while I'm doing that. Rob Parks
go ahead.
Asks a question. What does he mean by celestial survey? And before you answer, let me warn you, Rob Parks is an astronomy professor at a university. So cool. What do you mean by celestial survey?
In other words, putting in survey using the sun or stars.
Putting in survey.
Survey, in other words, putting a position on the ground to where you can put weapon systems on a common direction.
Okay, so you mean aligning east, west, north, south, getting your compass heading precise using stars and also probably getting your latitude and longitude precise with stars.
Yeah, you get your easting, northing, and your elevation. You get all that. And what you'll do is, and I'll talk about it a little bit later. There's a picture on there, but not to, because that actually Rob brings up a good point. I'd like to talk about that, but let's just, if we can, for just a second. When I looked at when I went back and I looked at my manuals, and this comes from the Corps Division Artillery on down below. So this is what everything that's important when we get firing artillery munitions. In other words, if I'm going to fire 155 millimeter or 105 millimeter round or a rocket artillery, everything that is important is right there on that diagram. In other words, what counts. So when I look at weather conditions, air temperature, air density, no wind, this is what we call meteorological data. Very important because it affects munitions. So we have to have MET data. Gun target line position. In other words, meteorological datum plane station. In other words, the Army, when we talk about artillery, considers everything to be on a plane at the same altitude. It's just easier to work with. In other words, when we talk about that, then we look at accurate range. In other words, gun to target line, what's the range? We can kind of figure out the range if we have forward observers looking at that, because in artillery, we normally, when we shoot indirect fire, there's two types of fire: direct fire where you can see your target, and indirect fire where you can't see your target and another person can see it. It's called a forward observer. And generally you're shooting longer distances.
Right.
So what number 3 says is no rotation of the Earth.
Yeah. What do you mean by that? Do you mean that you were trained, and when you did artillery, your manuals and your techniques did not account for Coriolis?
None of it. Everything what you see on there is what counts.
Did you not have a table? I'm imagining. I didn't do this. I'm imagining there was a chart that said, based on your heading, the gun's compass heading, and your latitude, that you would have to look up a correction that you would make.
Now, what we call those are TGPCs, which are terrain gun position corrections. So if you're on a slope, if you're on a upward or a downward slope, the Fire Direction Center will say, hey, number 3, you're on a slope. We're going to give you a terrain gun, or a TGPC, terrain gun position correction.
But you had nothing, you had no chart that included your compass heading.
Your compass heading?
Yeah, I mean, if you fire north or you fire south, if you fire east or you fire west.
Yeah, I'll show you how that. I'll show you how that works in the next diagram. Okay. We'll get into that. So
what I'm saying is no rotation of the Earth.
Yeah.
If there is a correction depending on your compass heading, that's because of the rotation of the Earth.
No, and we'll get into that. I'll talk to you about that.
Okay.
So here it specifically says no rotation of the Earth. It's these are standard conditions. In other words, this is what you're going to shoot all the time. So when we look at that, I don't see Earth's curvature in there. Okay. It'd be listed there. Now, when I go down and look at material, it goes into standard, standard weapon, projectile, fuse, all those other things. What the Army, and I know the Marine Corps does, muzzle velocity is very important. So you have to use what's called a chronograph, an M90 chronograph. You have to get muzzle velocity, because weapon systems, like you'll have a hot tube and a cold tube, and that munition will affect your accuracy. Is affected by, if you're shooting from a cold tube, you want to warm that tube up, you're going to get different effects on target. So that's really what's going to affect your target. So when we looked at that, that was something that kind of stood out to me, and I said, okay, so we're not accounting for it. Now the next chart is kind of what you were talking about.
Okay.
In other words, this is direction. In other words, weapon systems, if you look at this, is a 105 millimeter howitzer. So you'll have center, and this comes off a 100 series sight system. So directly from that cannon or that artillery piece is 3200 off that. Now, is that the azimuth, the actual azimuth that that gun is on? No, that's the sight system, how the sight system works, okay? So that's called a deflection. So a deflection is kind of like, it's an angle of fire off the azimuth of fire, the actual gun's azimuth, okay? So it's just another angle.
Right, so you offset the gun's sight a little bit because the shell's not going to go straight. Is that it?
Well, no, that the gunner's sight, or the gunner's sight has has the scales on it. So basically, what you're looking at, these are scaled numbers. So directly out in front of that gun with that scale is going to be 3200. Now you're going to lay that howitzer. In other words, those aiming circles. There's going to be two surveyors basically out in front of that firing battery, or out in front of that gun. One is going to lay, the other one is going to safe, or it's going to verify its lay. So in other words, we have safety, we have accountability. So now we're going to orient that gun on a direction on what's called the azimuth of fire. In other words, the azimuth to the enemy, where we want to shoot the direction. That's going to be on the gun, that's going to be 3200 when they set their sight up. So in other words, they're going to use aiming references. Not to get too technical, I don't want to get too far into it. But just know that there's a fan. So you can go 200 mils left and 200 mils right. Okay, so if you see that, I have the 200 mils left, 200 mils right. So that deflection to the left is going to be, the max is going to be 3,400. The right is going to be 3,000. Now, the gun can't fire beyond those 200 mils and 200 left, because what would happen is the gun would flip over. In other words, the ballistic, the recoil would flip that gun over. So that's as far as you're going to be able to traverse left, and as far as you're going to be able to traverse right. Okay. Following me so far? So now that fan, that's your firing fan. That's basically your range and your fan for that weapon system. If that weapon system has to fire beyond that, that weapon has to physically shift. In other words, it has to move. It has to shift.
You have to rotate.
Or shift right. It has to make a physical shift. So the gunner's screw has to make a physical shift, because now you're exceeding the limits. So when I looked that up, and this is very clever, whoever did this, it said a weapon must incur a shift to fire beyond these limits. A weapon will normally displace from 1 to 10 mils on average during a shift. In other words, you're going to get a little displacement. So I'm going to get about a 1 to 10 mil displacement. This has been used in Table I, ATP 03-09-22, and as Earth's curve. They listed in as Earth's curve 1 mil beyond 3,400 mils and 1 mil beyond 4,000 mils. Now, I want you to sit back and think about that for a second. If I can't go beyond that shift left, and I can't go beyond that shift right, am I ever going to use that number?
I don't know. Let me throw this one up there. Someone named Flat Earth Math says, what's funny about this material is that in another page of this same manual, there are tables for Coriolis corrections. Can you confirm or deny that those tables exist?
No, I've never
do not.
I've never seen them.
Okay.
At no point. Yeah, you'd have to tell me that.
Let me ask it straightforward again. At no point is there a correction that is based on your heading, the gun's heading, like that? If you are firing north, you must apply X mils one way. If you are firing south, you must apply X mils the other way. That's not in there.
Well, you're talking about direction now.
It's a pretty clear question, and I'd like an answer.
Yeah, you're talking about azimuths now.
Yeah, so based on
that,
yeah, of course, that's the word.
That weapon system has a 6,400 mil firing capability.
I'm not asking about the capability. I don't see how that's relevant. What I'm asking,
sure it
is you have the azimuth of your target.
Okay, define that.
That would be, I usually define it as the compass heading, but it's not. You want the celestial, not the compass heading. So the celestial heading would be ideal.
We're talking about a compass azimuth. We're talking about an azimuth. Okay.
An azimuth. That is 0 degrees is north, 90 degrees is east, 180 is south, 270 is west. Azimuth. So at some point, do you take the azimuth to your target and then either look it up in a chart or punch that into a computer and generate a correction based on that?
Based on Earth's curvature? No.
No, I didn't say anything about it. I just,
Oh,
is
you
there,
have to, but you
is
have.
there an azimuth-based correction?
There is in the table, and it's table I.
But you
And
don't
it's
use
never
it.
used.
Okay, so there you go. So for the audience, this is someone with artillery experience who says the table exists, but we never use it. Okay, so I think that's something they'll want to know.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
And it's and again, when you talk to people, because even in the military, and when you get a certain certification, and I'm a master gunner, I have master gunner certification. When you start talking about ballistics and trajectory and stuff, you'll get some people in the military. Oh yeah, you know what? I've heard drill sergeants talking about it. I go up and I say, dude, that's not how it works. And I go, you talk about the grain of the bullet, and you talk, because I've had to write standard operating procedures for Udari Range Complex in Kuwait. Now that complex has over 100 training facilities. It has over 40 live fire ranges, from small arms, from pistol to machine gun to mortar to artillery to rocket. I've had to write SOPs for all those ranges. Now, in any of those SOPs, it never, ever list use Coriolis, use Earth curve, none of it. And I get out, when you talk to people, and I've went out, people shooting snipers and artillery, and nobody uses any of that.
Okay, I think that's cool. I'd like to put a pin in the Coriolis discussion, and instead, like, take a moment to just get right back to your 45-degree sector test, and then ask, have you checked? I think you said you talked to some globers. Have you checked with any globe-based resource to say, hey, is this 45-degree sector test, is this correct?
How would they know?
Okay, that's cool.
How would they know?
You have it.
You know, you're talking about something that is, by what you said, is new. It's and a lot of people are interested in it. So I think when we talk about that discussion, and are we done with references? Because that's really about when we look at.
I just misspelled your name. I'm sorry. Somebody was asking your full name. Corey Kell.
Yes.
Correct, right?
Yes.
Okay. Are we done with references? That's what I mean by references. I meant references specific to your 45-degree sector test, which I would, I'll show you my references here in a minute.
Sure.
But you'd say, no, you didn't.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I talked to, it says, hey, is this,
you didn't talk to anybody. You didn't look up anything.
Well, now when you say didn't look up anything, now I'm using resources like Arches and Google Earth, specifically. Yeah.
Okay, so, but they don't have 45-degree sector tests on there.
No, but I'm looking at the geometric makeup. In other words.
Okay.
So when we look at geometric shapes, then because we're going to do the breakdown. When we do the breakdown, okay, we can get this thing in sectors, and then we can check it by sector.
All right, that's fair. And this is what I've found. I always ask this question, and it's something I really want to stress. Something I want to use this channel as a platform to just really leverage this thinking, which is, please, instead of saying, hey, I worked all this math and I proved the Earth is flat. Let's instead say, hey, I came up with a test that I think could tell the difference between flat Earth and globe Earth. What do you people think about this test? Can anyone shoot a hole in this for me? Right? And then ideally, somebody like myself could come along and say, I love that test. Let's do it. Let's do it together. Or I could say, no, I don't think that test's going to work.
I think peer review. You're talking about peer review as well.
A little bit. I mean, it's an informal sort of
Yeah.
community that we're part of, right?
Yeah. I like that analogy. I think when you come out and you say, the earth is, I don't go around saying, well, the earth is flat based on this. Hey, this is what I get.
Right. But I'm a bit shocked that you've spent years on this, right? The table that I showed earlier was from 2020, summer of 2020. So we're talking years.
Yeah.
And in that time, you've been doing many, many more of these measurements. And this is the first time that we're sitting down here and going, yeah, but is it even right? Why are we taking these measurements if they're wrong?
Yeah, and that's you bring up a good point. When I first got into flat Earth, so I took my time. In other words, I'm not on anybody's timetable. In other words, I'm going to and just FYI, I wrote in 2017. I was working on a different project. I wrote the Defense Contractor 101 Handbook. So published that in 2020. So I was working on several things. So you get pretty busy, doing other things. So it's not just something I was doing alone.
Right.
So
it's not full-time job.
Yeah, it's not your full-time. Now, being in Afghanistan allowed me to kind of really, when we got restrictive and they restricted our movement, it really gave me a lot of time to work on it. Now, one area I would like to do is I'm looking at doing is the sun survey point, because I noticed, and I just, not to go off on a tangent, but one thing I kind of noticed in the survey points in the summer solstice, as the sun came into the summer solstice, the survey points were about 4 inches apart, real close. And as I got to the solstice, my survey point was like right on top of each other. So about a couple of days there, it was like real close. In other words, hardly any difference. But once it started to go back the other way from the summer solstice, as it started to go back or move in the other direction, because it'll move from one direction to the other direction.
Interesting.
To kind of move a little bit more farther in distance. So that's something I want to kind of keep a look at, and I'd like to do further experimentation. In other words, what I'd like to do is just set up and do summer survey or do survey point tracking. So in other words, over a period of time, and then just look at your distances going into solstice, going out of solstice, to kind of really look at that and look at, again, those are just things I kind of noticed. So
that's an interesting observation. And I would say I'm pretty decent with math. I did not do the math, but when you sent that link and you said you were moving the survey point by matters of inches.
Yeah,
I was definitely skeptical. I remain skeptical, but maybe you're onto something. We should do the math. I would be happy to do the math for you, or help you through the math of exactly what is the predicted motion of that. Although I would normally consider it moving in respect to time as opposed to position, which I think is another one of those things, like vocab thing, that we stumble across.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm talking about. When you keep that solar time the same, in other words, that's where it's going to show up your movement left or right. Now, if you change your solar time, then that's going to throw that all off. So you want to keep your same solar time. That will tell you the shift in position. Yeah.
But what I would normally do, because what I'm used to doing, is that your position is fixed, but the moment of solar noon varies from day to day, and it's a matter of seconds, seconds to minutes, day on day.
Well, again, we're looking at position now.
If you hold the position fixed, the moment of solar noon will vary from day to day.
You can't, though, because that's what's going to show up. That's what's going to show up in your distance on ground. That's what I'm talking about, Matt. Okay. So that's going to shift. So if you keep that same time, that survey.
I said same position, different time. I think you're doing same time, different position.
Well, yeah, that's based on, again, that intersection where the sun intersects with the observer. And that's what you want. That's what you want. That's what you want to find out. because that's what's going to tell your distance. That's how your accuracy, how accurate you're going to be able to tell. And again, when people come up to me in time, I was like, no, dude, that's not how it works.